something happening here. What it is ain't exactly clear. There's a man with a gun over there, telling me I got to beware. I think it's time we
Welcome to
stop
Occupy TV. I'm Nancy Koerber with Good Grief America.
I'm Mark Thomas.
And we're the co-founders of Good Grief America, which is a statewide nonprofit dealing with foreclosure issues in the state. And we're going to have some fun here this morning, sharing what we're doing and what we're going to be doing and what you can do. And
Talking about kind of a challenging topic, but we're going to have some fun with it. So, Nancy, why don't you let us know how we got started in this?
Well, Mark and I came from the real estate industry. I started in it about 35 years ago, which we call old school, where things were done simple, ethical, and we all knew what was going on. And the market changed over the last decade, and some pretty wild things happened. And Mark and I in the industry started speaking out about some of the things we were seeing with finance, the price of homes, and we said it was going to be the end of our industry if we didn't put a stop to it. And unfortunately, we got told we had bad attitudes and we needed to go home and shut up. Now, I wish the biggest problem we had in America right now was our bad attitudes. Unfortunately, we were right. And 3 years ago, when the market completely crashed, we threw in the towel and said, we know we're not going to make any money, but we better be making a difference since we understand what's going on here. And we started digging in. And basically, we called our bank to ask for help. The banks got bailed out, and we got told that we'd be getting a trickle-down effect. That's what the banks promised to do for the Americans.
When was that?
That was December of 2008. September of 2008, the market crashed.
Okay.
And we're going to talk about the pieces that were behind the scenes and behind the curtain that created that crash, and how it's still affecting us and how it's going to continue to affect us and what we can do about it. But basically, we had very little debt and a lot of equity in our house, and we asked for some help from our bank, and our bank said, we can't help you unless you're 90 days behind, which we fought and argued with and finally gave up and went with their new plan. The new rules was to stop making our house payment and apply for some help. We've been in our home 17 years making payments, and the market was just pretty challenging for us.
So the bank really was the leader in that thinking.
Absolutely, and millions of people went through that.
And it's not like we had an extra amount of money. Our income had dropped, so
dropped to 80%.
We were having difficulty making the payments.
And we couldn't sell the house in the market that was going on. It was just a very, very challenging time for us. And we decided that we needed to start doing something proactive. And the first thing was to get a grip on our own house. And what happened was when we quit making the house payment, they immediately, as soon as they could, threw us into foreclosure and didn't help. And that was 3 years ago, about this month. When
that it all started.
Mm-hmm. And so the end result was I got mad. I felt like we'd gotten a bait and switch. And I thought it was only us. Our research now shows millions and millions of Americans went through exactly this. They got a bait and switch. Mark, how did you feel the day that they walked up to the door and handed you your foreclosure notice instead of help?
I'll tell you, that was probably the worst day of my life so far. It was very depressing. I went into just a state of depression for a good month, and felt like a complete failure, and didn't want anybody to know about it. It was a big failure point.
And this is one of the pieces that we're seeing is keeping us all immobilized, is that people's fear and people's shame keeps them from talking, and that's one of the reasons we haven't been finding solutions faster.
I also found that I didn't want to look at the paperwork. We got quite a bit of paperwork, and people involved with this will get foreclosure notices, and it's very severe looking. I didn't want to face it, so I just threw it all in the corner and ignored it.
So those modification applications we filled out.
Well, that came up a little bit later on. Yeah.
Okay. When we were applying for the modification, we found that we were having to fax in 88 pages every week, and they always lost them.
And tell a little bit more about what is the modification. What are you talking about?
That's
here?
where we asked for some short-term relief while we got back on our feet. I didn't think that this disaster was going to go on as long as it did. And what we found with those modifications is that Americans all over America millions of people are applying for them. They all go through the same thing.
Was that the HAMP modification?
Yeah, ours was the HAMP.
Yeah, the HAMP. It was a new government program.
And in fact, most of our homeowners call it the HEMP modification because we want to know what they've been smoking. They are not helping us. They are not coming forward. Less than 1% of the people that apply for one of those actually gets one.
And that was in 2009.
Early 2009 was our efforts to start getting that. We've now been 3 years in our house. On February 1, it will be 3 years since our last house payment. And we're not in foreclosure today because of some of the work that we're doing here throughout the state. That wasn't our plan, but this is what they give us. You either get a foreclosure or you sit here, and there's no place left to make the payments.
So continuing on with that process, then a modification application to the bank.
What have we done, 5 or 6 of them now?
5 or 6 of those, yeah.
Yeah. And it's always, we're denied too much money, not enough money, too many assets, not enough assets.
Incomplete paperwork.
Incomplete paperwork, your dog's toenails were clipped wrong. It really doesn't matter. What we get...
Net present value isn't the right number.
Which they won't tell you what that is, so you certainly can't fix it. So anyway, we took this nightmare and turned it into finding solutions for homeowners in Oregon. And we have, to date, we have stopped thousands of foreclosures throughout Oregon. We have hundreds of homeowners in long-term limbo like we are. And we don't know if the total outcome, but we have a lot of people that are now starting to get sustainable workouts because we're forcing them through the court systems. The banks are losing in the courts when we take them on. And it's forcing them into doing something, and it's getting a lot of traction in Oregon, probably more than any place in the country.
Okay, so, how was it that the country, the economic system, the financial system got into this situation? What are we really looking at here?
Well, basically, this entire mess we're in was done by design. That's what our research. At Good Grief America, we have a very extensive research team, and we also have built a network of over 40 attorneys throughout the state that we work with. That are well trained. We just had a Portland training for our attorneys this week, and they just continue to get on the cutting edge of understanding what happened and how to push back. What we realized early on was there were a lot of us, and a few of them are what created this nightmare. And the nightmare was very profitable on the way up during the last decade for the banks on Wall Street, the big banks, but it's even more profitable on the way down, in spite of what we hear in the media. So if we're going to just maybe go back through, maybe you want to back off, and before we go into that, and just talk a little bit about our accomplishments so far, what we're going to be working on in 2012, and then go into that history.
Sure. That's a good
Our accomplishments over the last couple of years are we've been educating legislators, educating homeowners. We have over 1,000 homeowners that have been through our workshops. We have a new ebook coming out that our goal is to take that number to 4,000 by the end of 2012.
And then what about attorneys?
And attorneys. We've had a number of attorney trainings, training that network. We just sent, well, why don't you tell them about the trip you just took to New York?
Okay, yeah. We've learned about a seminar, a workshop in New York being conducted by Max Gardner, who's one of the leading bankruptcy attorneys in the nation. He's based in North Carolina, and he's had a family history actually in the legal world, attorneys. And he has also been a leader in foreclosure defense, and so been one of the few attorneys in the country who's been willing to look at this issue from the standpoint of doing something to help the borrowers. And to listen to him, he said there's plenty of attorneys, plenty of money on the legal system on the side of the banks, and there's been very little on the side of the borrowers or the homeowners. So he does education for attorneys. And I was fortunate enough to be able to travel with one of the attorneys in our network to New York and attend a 2-day intense workshop there on Saturday and Sunday back in November, getting an update on the very latest in legal strategies that are being developed by Max Gardner and his team and used around the country now with his education. So giving us tools, and I'm not an attorney, but giving the attorneys tools. I'm a researcher. I provide the information for the attorneys to go into court and make a case on behalf of the borrowers, looking at this information that is being used to foreclose against them. Because there is...
So we're going to talk about the 95% of the foreclosures in the state of Oregon and many across the country are basically illegal.
Right, illegal or legitimate or wrongful, incorrect steps have been used. The banks have used just procedures that don't follow Oregon statutes.
And that's what we've been doing to stop the foreclosures and put these guys in their place, and it's been highly effective. So we've stopped foreclosures, we stopped legislation last year. We had over 700 of our families call in to the legislature, the governor's office, and the attorney general's office. They each made 6 calls. That's 4,200 phone calls in about a 48-hour period of time, and stopped some really bad legislation that the banks were trying to put in place. That would have just killed our state and killed title in our state, as far as thousands of homeowners who aren't even in foreclosure today but could have their title on their property destroyed after 300 years of a very simple, clean, healthy title system we have that we'll cover a few things with.
So you're talking there about people who are current on their loans, who aren't in foreclosure,
right,
who this foreclosure crisis doesn't have any effect on me type of thinking.
Right.
But
But the work we did actually stopped that. Our homeowners, I can't say we did it, we orchestrated, but you know, I'm so grateful to families who are brave enough to step up and do something.
But so for people who are watching this, though, that aren't in a foreclosure, they really need to give pause and dig in and think about this.
Well, it could be them tomorrow, or they could be trying to sell their house down the road and not be able to if these banks continue on the path they're doing. Okay. Not only are the banks destroying the value on their homes, but they're destroying the title.
So it could be them, it could be their neighbor, it could be their
mother.
Their mother. Their
Absolutely.
child, their aunt or uncle, yeah.
So our movement in 2012, we're working on empowering the people. One of my favorite stories to share is when we showed the movie Capitalism, a Love Story. In fact, I'm going to just show, we've got some different books and videos here I'm going to talk about throughout the program. Capitalism, a Love Story was put together by Michael Moore, and in Southern Oregon, we had a video showing, we had 42 people show up for, and Michael Moore called in the middle of the movie, and it was a pretty exciting evening.
This wasn't by accident.
No, we'd set it up and arranged it, but the people didn't know. But one of the things Michael Moore, when he was putting together the movie, when he was interviewing people on Wall Street, he asked a top Wall Street professional, if we can call them that, aren't you concerned with the people? There's a lot of them, and there's only a few of you guys. And this Wall Street banker responded with, we're not concerned about the sheeple. Our only concern is if they ever organize.
The sheeple.
The sheeple. So thank you, Occupy, for helping to start that organizing movement across America that's around the world. There are 99% we are, and it's 1% of them. We have power. And that's the thing that we've been working on at Good Grief America, is looking to where we can take and put that power and where we can use it. And if we unite and we work together, we can move mountains. And one of our policies at Good Grief America is that we are politically neutral. We don't get involved in left and right thinking. we get involved in have and have not thinking. And there's a 1% have and a 99% have not. And we don't care if people are Republican, Democrat, anything else, none of the above, they are neighbors. And we work together as neighbors.
So basically what you're saying, when the Occupy movement really gained traction, we were ready for that.
We were, and we'd been preparing.
We were thinking that way, and we thought, hooray.
We knew that the people
Yay.
would start swelling in the streets, and we had to get a foundation. We didn't know what the name would be. And we like Occupy.
Yeah.
So our goal for 2012 is to empower the people, and we've got a lot of coalition efforts we're going to be doing across the state to impact far more families with this foreclosure issue in a positive way. Another one of our goals is to retell the story, get the true story told. Because the conversation is out there, is this a bunch of deadbeat Americans that bought houses that ruined the economy? And that's absolutely not what happened. So we're going to retell the story about how Wall Street planned this and pulled it off and is making a killing off of it.
You know, I've talked to homeowners who are facing foreclosure who bring that issue up. They're afraid to let the word out what they're being faced with because of the pushback from
Absolutely.
the community.
The pushback is terrible. Neighbors start cannibalizing on each other, and it's cruel.
It's kind of that divide and conquer.
It is the divide and conquer. And what we need to do is change that rhetoric and get people working together as community members and looking at what is the real vampire squid here. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute.
And that's where Occupy fits in so well.
So well. Yeah. So another goal of ours is to build the movement, empower with teach-ins throughout the state that we're creating. In fact, this television show will be part of some of those. And changing the system. We're working at legislative levels. We're working with community leaders. We're working through, there's a lot of things we can do throughout our communities. There are communities across the country that the city leaders and county leaders are putting ordinances that abandon homes by the banks. They're charging them $1,000 a day if they're not insured and they're not maintained. And then if the banks don't pay up, the cities foreclose on those homes. And,
that's pretty powerful.
It's pretty powerful. There's a lot of things we can do if we start having knowledge and sharing good ideas. I want to mention another book here, can I?
Okay, sure.
And I'll just hold it up here. This is called Griftopia by Matt Taibbi. Matt's a writer for the Rolling Stones.
The Rolling Stone magazine.
Thank you.
Yeah. No, he's not a songwriter.
Well,
okay.
He is in my book. This is called Griftopia, Bubble Machines, Vampire Squids, and the Long Con That Is Breaking America. And if any of you want more books and resources and videos, I'm going to talk about a few here today on our website at goodgriefamerica.org. We have a resource section that has all kinds of books and videos. And one of my slogans is, ignorance is not bliss. Start getting together. Another video I'll mention right here is called American Casino, and that's mentioned on there. We've got a number of videos and more going up. Get together with some friends, even if it's just 5 or 6 of you. Have a video night and a potluck and have discussions and talk about what you can do. But in Griftopia, there's a couple of things that are very interesting. I'm going to just make a quick quote here on page 123. Matt Taibbi talks about what the government estimated it was going to take to clean up this mess. And he said, with the 13 plus trillion we are estimated to ultimately spend on the bailouts, we could not only have paid off every subprime loan, we could have also paid off every loan in America and had enough money left over to buy a house for every other American. And instead, we're spending trillions on bailouts that will go into some of those numbers. And we're going to all end up in foreclosure and end up in a nightmare with rising unemployment.
At least many ending up in foreclosure.
Yeah, many.
It's getting larger.
Right.
Could you just take a moment, though, and explain one word, the subprime loans, just real quickly?
Yeah, subprime loans were...
Because that's kind of confusing. I know when I first heard that term, I thought it was, a real low interest percent loan. I thought that was good.
Yeah, and you came from the industry.
Yeah. So.
Subprime loans were where the borrower had no money, no credit. you know.
So they were a bad loan.
Yeah,
really.
they were really bad loans. These people had bailed out on many credit opportunities in the past, and they gave them high loans with nothing down and no skin in the game. They knew these things were going to go belly up.
So subprime means less than a good loan.
Less than a good
Yeah,
loan.
okay.
And there were 1.4 trillion of them made, and most of it during the years of 2005, 2006 was the heyday.
Large number. Okay.
And I'll say a few things about, another thing about Matt Taibbi. He has a quote in Griftopia, and he talks about Wall Street. He calls them a giant vampire squid that wrapped its tentacles around the face of humanity and drove its blood funnel into anything that smelled like money. And it's still doing it. If it smells like money, they're siphoning it. I get up in the morning and sometimes I can almost hear this huge sucking sound as all the money is being pulled out of our communities.
And where's that money going?
It's going to Wall Street and then it's going offshore, and America is being left with nothing but debt. And that's why our jobs are gone. You know, one of the core reasons our jobs are just shutting down. All of our micro businesses, which were the backbone of America, micro and small businesses have no access to credit. They were cut off in this mess. And you see doors closing in every town, every city across America. Average micro business supported 3 families. And as those shut down, unemployment skyrockets. In rural communities throughout Oregon, micro business was the backbone. And those people can't even go down a lot of times and get on the unemployment rolls if they were small business owners.
Okay, so we hear these unemployment numbers, 9%, 8.5%.
Yeah.
Well, what's your take on?
Well, in rural communities like Southern Oregon, it's up closer to 12. And the actual numbers of unemployment and underemployment is closer to 30 and growing. Right now, across America, 1 in 5 homes, 20% are on food stamps. And the only reason it isn't higher is because of shame. People are draining their families. Food banks are drained. It's incredible what this unemployment is doing because of this vampire squid. And with every layoff, then there's more foreclosures. And those people in the old days, if you had hard times, health problems, or a layoff, you sold your house and you were able to go regroup. You can't sell the houses anymore. So foreclosure becomes the standard. That's how people move, is through a foreclosure.
So the house, the values of the house are below what the loan amount on
Right,
the house
exactly.
is. And that's the the term is called underwater.
Right. Our property has dropped 54%.
In what period?
3
of
years.
time? 3 years.
And in the Rogue Valley right now, Southern Oregon, and a lot of the rural communities like Bend, Deschutes County, those areas, the rural communities, you're seeing anywhere from 17 to 21% drop in values every single year for the last 3 years.
So that's affecting all homes in
All
those
homes.
counties. Yeah.
All homes. People who are still employed, people who are still making their payments, are being set up for a foreclosure.
Okay.
We've had 6 million foreclosures in America so far, another 4 million in the works right now, and those numbers are expected to, those in the works, to double and triple by the end of the year, and we aren't even halfway through the snake's belly. If we're looking at about 60 million homes with loans in America, we could easily get to 50% in the next couple of years of homes that have been foreclosed on.
Wow. I see some of these programs and articles in the newspaper about how the housing market is bottomed out and it's starting to come back.
Real estimates by people who are looking at the numbers and the foreclosures and the job situation are showing that we are not going to be seeing it hitting bottom until about 2015, and we're not going to see a recovery in our real estate market for another decade, about 2022. And those numbers could adjust and become worse unless we can get a grip on this thing and stop it.
That's pretty serious. Yeah.
It's very serious. The bailouts that happened back in 2007. You remember the day Hank Paulson ran up the steps?
Right.
September of 2007.
The Secretary of Treasury.
Treasury.
Yeah.
He ran up the steps and he had a 3-page solution for his pals that left the rest of us out. It was a solution for the 1%. And he basically said we need $700 billion for these banks. And we need it now. And don't ask questions and don't put any strings on it. Now, a lot of that money has come back in. They bailed out that money with next to no strings attached, very low interest on it, and
no accountability.
No accountability. And the banks took it and invested it offshore. They put very little back into America. That's why our small businesses can't get funds. In fact, in 2010, we haven't seen the 2011 numbers yet. 2010, Bank of America made 6 new small business loans in Oregon.
6.
6. It's pretty appalling.
Bank of America.
Bank of America. We call them Bankrupt America. But that $700 billion was nothing compared to a bailout that was going on that wasn't publicized. And it was the Federal Reserve was loaning money to these banks at 0.001% interest. And $16 trillion was loaned out to banks all over the world that nobody knew about. And our local big banks on Wall Street turned around and loaned that money back to the government in the way of bonds at 3%. So they made money off the taxpayers by this quiet, silent bailout.
They're good at making money.
Yeah, $7.7 trillion was loaned back to our government. That's us. That's the taxpayers. And nobody talks about it. These things are not transparent. The first Federal Reserve audit ever happened recently, and these numbers are still being pulled out of what happened behind the curtains. Those Wall Street banks that we have, the main 6, made $13 million just for bonuses off of that bailout.
13 million?
And how much of it trickled
just
down?
Bonuses?
Yeah, just about. How much of it trickled down to our communities? How much right here in Eugene, Medford, Portland, trickled down? A lot of us call it tinkle down. That's what we feel like we've gotten from these big banks. So that was kind of, the bad news of what's we've been seeing. There is good news, and I want to spend some time on that too. But maybe we can go back and just take a couple of minutes and talk about what happened in the 20s.
Some of the history?
Some of the history and how we're repeating ourselves now and what was done to fix it and how we're not using that.
That's kind of important to think about, isn't it?
Yeah. In the 1920s, Wall Street was booming. The banks were making money. 6% of Americans owned homes. They were the 1%. And the rest of Americans were struggling. And the small guy, the everyday Joe, wanted part of the American dream.
And did they rent, the average person?
Yeah, the average
Or
person
renters?
rented.
Okay.
And they would, excuse me, the only place they could play on Wall Street was to go down to something called the bucket houses. So they would go to these things called bucket houses on payday, and they would put a bet on what if they thought a stock was going to go up or down. And enough of them were smart enough that they knew what direction things were going, and this was a key element that crashed Wall Street and crashed the banking system in 1929. And those bets. And so the market crashed, poverty hit the masses even worse. Jobs were gone, much like we have today. People who did own homes, if they weren't one of the top elite, were losing their homes in foreclosure.
People lost faith in the
Absolutely.
The system.
They were putting money in little boxes under their bed or socks or whatever, and if they had any, but they weren't about to put it in the banks. And it took 4 years before the government stepped in and finally started creating some solutions. And that was the birth of the Glass-Steagall Act. And that Glass-Steagall Act did a number of things. Number one, it guaranteed your money if it was in a commercial bank. And so people started having some faith to put their money back into the banks, which allowed the banks to have money that they could loan out to start getting micro businesses, small businesses in America going again, and rebuilding our economy. Another key part of that Glass-Steagall Act was to make the betting houses, the bucket houses, illegal. There were a number of other provisions. Those are the core ones. And so we started rebuilding our economy, and started building manufacturing, and we were a booming economy. We started building a middle class that became very strong.
What was done with the investment banks?
The investment banks that were the riskier banks weren't guaranteed.
Okay, so
They were
there
on
was
their
no
own.
government guarantee on.
Nope. So if they lost money, they lost money. If they made money, they made money. And so we were cooking along. About 1979 was the peak of manufacturing in America. And I think this is really to understand our economy and why this whole foreclosure place was put in the way it was, or the bad loans that we have today. Greedy players on Wall Street wanted to make more money. They didn't appreciate the middle class. And so they started pulling our jobs offshore. And as the job market and manufacturing collapsed through the 80s and the 90s, our economy started having some struggles. And we started seeing some bubbles, like the dot-com bubble. Then the bankers knew that they could create a bubble beyond anything the planet had ever seen if they could get rid of the Glass-Steagall Act. And they could really run a shell game.
And what was it about that? Was it deregulation or?
Yeah, that was pretty strong regulation that kept unbridled greed pretty well managed.
So if they could remove the regulations, they
Exactly. And so in
wide open game.
1999, the Glass-Steagall Act was eliminated. We had a Democratic president and we had a Republican Congress. The Republican Congress was able to get the president to let that go. And the story pretty much was from the Wall Street players and the Republican Congress was, trust us, we'll manage ourselves.
So they'd been building for some time trying to get this regulation
Right.
removed. There'd been a deregulation movement for many years.
It started in the 70s to work toward this. They finally, in 1999, got rid of the deregulation.
Okay.
They also put a piece into place in 1995 called MERS that we'll spend a few minutes talking about. They were gearing up for this nightmare that we're living in today. And it was very, very profitable. Our private sector living wage jobs started shrinking. So we had to create a new economy. And so by the time they got rid of Glass-Steagall, we had an administration in the 2000s that stepped in and said, just go shopping. We're optimists. And by the way,
I remember hearing that.
yeah, just go shopping.
You've got to go shopping.
And
You've got to keep the economy going.
The
So
average
go shopping.
American was being pushed on them credit cards. We talk to homeowners that have 10 credit cards that are racked up to $100,000 because we did not have living wage jobs.
I remember the days of receiving multiple credit card offers almost every day.
We still get them.
Yeah,
We
not
still
quite
get
as
them.
many.
Not
but
quite as many, but we still get them. And so then the other big piece was when they could get rid of the Glass-Steagall Act, they could say, use your house as an ATM machine. And they created a bubble that made the value of the houses go through the roof. And then they told us regularly, daily, on the media, every place you went, you were getting mail to just go take out a business or a line of credit on your house. You can send your kids to college. You can
use the equity. Don't let that equity go to waste.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Instead of saving, and there was no way to save anymore because our living wage jobs were shrinking faster than the economy was going up. And so they created the biggest bubble machine, and Matt Taibbi talks about that in his book, and I call it Bubblicious. They were having the time of their life.
A bowl of candy.
It was a bowl of candy,
bubble gum. Huh?
And it was Bubblicious, and America was in the midst of a cashectomy. And so was the rest of the planet. And so basically what Wall Street was doing, when they got rid of the Glass-Steagall Act, they started commingling the risky banks with the commercial banks, and they had some very sophisticated ways they did it through the securitization process that was not transparent. That they could take these highly risky products and get them guaranteed by the government.
And securitization process, they created mortgage-backed securities that were actually bonds or certificates that investors could
And so
could
what
purchase.
they did is they went and they looked out at especially America, but the whole world, and they looked at where were the biggest bubblicious machines they could build. They knew that they could create equity in our homes by cranking up artificial value, and they knew Americans had pension plans because Americans had saved. So they went to, they looked at all these union plans, these big, all kinds of plans, pension plans across Americas, and what they did was they blended those two together. They borrowed the money from the pension plans and promised them a far bigger yield if they would buy those mortgage-backed securities. And then they cranked up artificially the values of the houses, and they had the people borrow that money.
So instead of investing in treasury bills, they could invest in something that would provide a better return.
Better return.
Yeah.
And it was all fictitious. And what they ended up doing was they privatized their gains and socialized their losses. Because the regulation
being the
is
big
gone.
banks
The big banks, exactly. And so basically we watched this machine go on over about a 10-year period of time. To me, it was horrifying, but most people just seem to think we had the best economy on the planet.
Things are great.
Things are great. And they not only cannibalized our pension plans, but pension plans all over the world. And this is why we see governments crashing like Greece and Italy and Ireland and Iceland, and the list goes on. They used our houses as the conduit to siphon the life out of this planet.
Okay.
And now what they've got to do is foreclose on the houses to hide the damages. And they also will be taking control to get America back to 6% of the people who own homes. And they'll be able to hide the damages. What they did through that process of securitization to turn our loans into bonds, there was a whole set of rules and regulations that had to be abided by. They didn't do them. They faked it. And that's where we get them in the court system.
Okay.
So when they come to foreclose on us, they have to make up paperwork to make it look like they at least did some of it. And that's where the robo-signing that we hear about the media. And we bust them on it. And that's where we go in and do the research on these loans, and we catch them with their hand in the cookie jar, and we say, not my home.
Well, that's one of the places I get involved, is looking at the details of those loans, and I see signatures that are obviously forged because they don't match for the same named person who is a vice president of one company on one document. The same person on the next document is a vice president of a different company, and the signature's different, but it's the same person.
Okay.
It's just amazing.
And we have some pretty strict statutes in Oregon that state the rules upon foreclosing on homes, and they're violating them on 95% of these foreclosures.
Yeah, so the devil's in the details. It's really important.
And what the banks do is keep homeowners spinning with trying to get that modification.
That lower payment.
That lower payment.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they keep them in such a tizzy and a tailspin that they don't have the focus to figure out what's really going on behind the curtain. And it's not that hard to stop the foreclosures if people understand what is going on behind the curtain.
Okay.
And that's the core of the work we do. I'll mention just a couple more books, too, at this point. Mark, what's your favorite book? 13 Bankers?
13 Bankers.
What did you like about that book?
Oh, my gosh. It's not an easy read, but it gets into the details of the banks and the individuals who created this system, and digs right into the details of it and exposes it. So it's well worth reading.
Okay.
Yeah.
The Monster is another one that I'll mention. Again, if you go to our website at goodgriefamerica.org, you'll find a whole resource with a lot of great books. And The Monster, it's called How a Gang of Predatory Lenders and Wall Street Bankers Fleeced America and Spawned a Global Crisis. It's unbelievable. Another one of my favorite books is Danny Schechter's A Crime of Our Time. And he's got a DVD out called Plunder that goes with this. And he just makes it in really layman's language to understand how we got fleeced. And we cannot start finding solutions until we understand what happened. So that is our core. At Good Grief America, we do education, research, and then referral to solutions. and it's been highly effective. They've kept us ignorant. They keep us in such an emotional tailspin. Most of the homeowners who call me, we were doing a teach-in yesterday. A woman was sobbing and crying at the event. She's so emotionally distraught, she can't even hear a solution. The first thing we have to do is back up, let go of our house, get educated, and then step in and start slapping them.
By let go of our house, you mean just mentally detached from having to own this house?
Right. We've got to let go of the emotions because they interfere with being able to make smart business decisions.
But not to move out of the
No,
house.
in fact,
Okay.
don't move out. There are some real consequences of moving out of the house before the foreclosure is done, if that's the choice you want to go. If the foreclosure happens and you're in the house, we have people who want sustainable workouts. We have people who just want to punish the banks. We have people who want sustainable exit strategies. And at Good Grief America, we don't make the decision of what the homeowner should want. What we do is try and give them a buffet of options to dig into.
Right. No, they have choices. They have options. They have some power in this
Exactly.
game also.
And they can make it be what they want it to be instead of what the banks are feeding them and what the media is spinning them. Some people they just want to leave. Maybe they got a job coming up in Washington and they want to move. So they want a sustainable exit strategy. They just want to move on with their life. If you move out of your house before the foreclosure, and the bank is checking on you regularly, in fact, the bank usually has somebody show up at your property once a month and takes a picture. And that's a whole scam. They pay that person $5 and put a $500 bill against your account for doing it. It's unbelievable what they rack up with junk fees to make money off of these foreclosures. But if you move out and they can document it, they'll drill the locks off your house, they'll take it over, they'll note that you abandoned your home, and then when they foreclose on it, they can get a deficiency judgment on it because it's no longer considered your primary residence.
And so it's not your primary residence. And so what's the deficiency judgment?
Deficiency judgment. Let's say you have a $200,000 loan and they sell it for $100,000. They will chase you for the other $100,000. Whereas if you live in the house at the time of foreclosure, they can't do that.
Oh my gosh! So, being gone and owing another $100,000 on something you're not living in anymore at all—that's pretty severe.
And homeowners don't know that.
Yeah.
Another issue is we have a lot of homeowners say, "Well, I just want to do the right thing. I can't pay for my house, so I'm going to do a deed in lieu." And a deed in lieu is where you give them the deed in lieu of paying for it, and you just turn it over to them, give them the keys.
You sign it over.
Right, and just sign it over. You can get a deficiency judgment and a 1099-C for that, which means they chase you for the difference, and they can also send you that much money. So if it was $100,000, you have to pay taxes on it.
And what about that credit rating that everyone cherishes so much and wants to protect?
Well, yeah, that's a really interesting phenomenon. We use the analogy of a poacher catching a monkey in the jungle. People say, I'll keep borrowing the money to keep the payment going, or I want to do the right thing because I don't want to hurt my credit score. We have been sold a bill of goods on the credit score. And we use the analogy of the monkey in the jungle. The way a poacher catches a monkey is he gets a little coconut, puts a very small hole in one end, puts a rope through and ties a knot and ties it around the tree. The other end puts a hole just big enough for the little monkey paw to go in, and he chops up a little treat that the monkey can smell. And the monkey shows up, and this is a trap. Monkey shows up, sticks his hand, he smells it, sticks his hand in to grab the treat and tries to pull it out, and he can't because he has a fist. So the monkey starts screaming. Now, if the poacher tried to chase the monkey through the jungle, he'd lose every time. But this trap is highly effective because the monkey is almost in a form of PTSD with screaming and shrieking and going wild and trying to pull this treat out. And the poacher walks up and throws the net over the monkey and has dinner that night. And that's what these banks are doing with homeowners. And so we tell homeowners, you've got to let go of your credit score. It's already destroyed. They've already done that one to you. You can't fix it. I don't care if you do a deed in lieu, if you do a foreclosure, or if you do a short sale. They have different amounts that your credit will be hit, but you will be hit. And so homeowners are like the little monkey with his hand in the coconut screaming while the predator is throwing a net over them. And they think they're saving their credit score. They think, as they keep applying for those modifications, they're going to be one of the 1%, when in fact they aren't. So,
so maybe we need to rethink this credit score thing and
well,
the credit thing, and
it's really
not
interesting.
be so
Yeah,
attached to that.
and we're working on some teach-ins on just that. That'll be talking about that and money flow in our communities and how to recreate a new economy in our communities with alternative currencies and working as a community instead of working with Wall Street banks. But the homeowner quite often is caught with his hand in the coconut on lots of issues. Credit score is one. The modification is the other. Now, there are some benefits to the modification in that it quite often stalls the foreclosure. We have homeowners that have stayed in their homes years by just keep filing them. I think our longest...
applying for
the modification, they get denied. Then they just turn around and apply again. In fact, the letters come and say, you don't qualify, so why don't you do a short sale or a deed in lieu? We just tell them, turn around and file for another one. You just keep filing because it quite often, it's not guaranteed, but it quite often buys time. Our longest standing homeowner doing that is 4.5 years in their home. 15 modification applications, all have been denied. And
I think the banks must seem to get a gold star or something when they send the reports into the government saying, oh, I'm working with all of these borrowers to modify their loans. We don't have it done yet, but we're working with them.
In fact, Congress has hit the banks really hard for not doing a better job.
So
this is their effort. So if there's anything we can do to play the game along with these guys for our favor is keep applying for those things. But don't stick your hand in the coconut thinking you're going to get one. And those people who do get one, most of them aren't sustainable. 60% of them go belly up within 18 months. They're totally unsustainable offers. Tell us about the one that they sent you.
Oh, God. That was almost humorous. They extended the term out to 40 years.
And how old would you be by then?
I would be 104 years old or something like that. But they also added, of course, kept all the fees, all the junk fees, the past payments that were not made, added all that into the balance. And then even if I paid that loan off at the end of the 40 years, there was a $320,000 balloon payment after the loan had been paid off.
Right. If you made it to 104, still making that.
So
now, Mark,
I didn't sign that.
And a few people do, and that's where the 1% come in. These things are totally unsustainable. What we are finding that works is if we can get them jammed in court and they don't want the judges seeing what they did, is they'll come forward, and we're starting to see they actually are cramming down the face amount, cramming down the interest, and giving people sustainable workouts. But you don't get them by applying. You get them by having some attorney smack them into shape. And so that's one strategy.
Yeah, the payment was lower on the offer they made.
But it was going to start going up in 5 years.
Yeah, but it started going up.
And was your income at your age, 64, going to be going up in 5 years?
No.
Okay.
I don't think so. Not in this economy.
So we had a situation where the banks, it used to be people were looking for money. Now we had the banks, we had money looking for people so they could create these bubble machines to siphon. And the way the bubble machines worked was, I'll give you an example. One loan and one homeowner that won a pretty substantial win in court had a $320,000 mortgage. When we did the research on that loan, it appeared by their own formulas that the Wall Street bankers did not take $320,000 out of the pension plans. They took close to $1 million to fund the $320,000 loan. So this is the first part of the Ponzi where they made a fortune. So they had $680,000 that went in someone's pocket. And some of it was used to buy credit default swaps, to bet that Don, the homeowner, wouldn't be able to make those payments down the road. And the way the loan was structured, because it was an adjustable, they knew he would go belly up.
Well, that sounds kind of like that old bucket house thing.
It was the old
Almost.
bucket house. It was very close to it. The first thing up front was that they created a Ponzi by pulling 3 times the face amount. They bilked the investors, and they didn't know it and didn't understand it. And by the way, those lawsuits are rolling. as well as the homeowner lawsuits. But then they took some of that money in that Ponzi and bet that they wouldn't. And according to their own formulas and insider whistleblowers who are now bringing it out, they were quite often making up to 30 times the face amount bets on these highly risky loans. This is what crashed the market in 2000.
So these don't have to be registered anywhere.
Nope.
There's no visibility.
They called them insurance policies. They were not insurance policies. The only reserve behind them was our U.S. Treasury. And this is what crashed the market. Lehman Brothers and AIG were the two main houses these bucket bets ran through. And Lehman went down. And the big boys on Wall Street let them go down. They didn't let AIG go down. And right now, AIG is a conduit right to our Treasury and to our Federal Reserve for trillions of dollars. It's estimated there's at least $150 trillion worth of bucket bets. And the more houses that they can foreclose on, the more bets that are going to be cashed in on. So if you took Don's loan of $320,000 and you times that by 30 times, you're looking at $10 million worth of bucket bets. And they called them a fancy name of credit default swaps. So you had a $1 million Ponzi on the front end and up to a $10 million casino on the back end on some loan that should have never been made, that crashed our market and destroyed our jobs. And there's this huge commitment to Wall Street to continue with foreclosures at all costs because the bucket house bets are so profitable.
Well, that's a lot of money moving around, and it's not moving around in the hands of the 99%.
No, it's not. It's being siphoned. That's
yeah.
that giant vampire squid that wrapped its tentacles around the face of humanity.
Discouraging.
And so, it feels pretty powerless when we talk about these things, but really we have a lot of power, and that's some of the research and work that we do. And as people quit participating in these programs and quit participating in their own demise, as we stop foreclosures, we stop the bucket house payoffs. And there's a number of things that can be done. We're working on a statewide moratorium. I'd love to see a national moratorium just to stop this bubble machine. We have got our AG just put out this week.
Attorney General.
Our Attorney General.
Okay.
A powerful piece he's planning on adding into the Unfair Trade Practices Act.
This is for the state of Oregon.
For the state of Oregon. Okay. And Unfair Trade Practices Act has all kinds of penalties for abusive behavior by different entities in industries, but the banking industry has been exempt, so they can run their casino and their abuse on us throughout Oregon and throughout many states in the nation. And he's just putting teeth right now. Hopefully by the 25th of January, those teeth will be in place, where when a homeowner can prove they've been predatorized this way, they can not only sue if they win, which there's a good chance they would if their research showed that they had a strong case. They can not only get their attorney fees paid, they can stop these foreclosures, and they can get damages. And that's going to be called power.
Okay.
But people have to understand the casino, and they have to understand the simple things they can do to stop it. And people who are not in foreclosure, who are not at risk, our goal is to educate them so they support their neighbors. Support their neighbors through this terrible time. It could be them tomorrow.
Right, and don't ostracize your neighbors,
Right.
but support, join arms.
Exactly. And these same bubble machines, any debt that was out there, they not only did it with our houses, they did it with the visas, they did it with medical debt, any debt that isn't being paid. These banks can swoop in and buy for pennies on the dollar, sell through these securitized systems, take far more than the face amount out of the pension plans, and then bet that the things are going down. And we need to start to understand these things, stop them at our city, at our county, at our state levels, educate our legislators, and start putting serious teeth into this machine, and we're well into it. The biggest bubble right now that's ballooning are student loans, and they're not something you can bankrupt.
Okay, so as jobs are gone,
Right.
a lot of people are going back to school.
And taking out student loans.
Yeah.
In hopes that they'll have jobs in 3 years, and they may or may not. And that's not something they can bankrupt. So we're creating a whole new bubble machine.
Well, how does this work with the kind of the players on Wall Street? We hear names about banks, servicers, you know.
Yeah, I think the first thing people need to understand is the party that they're paying the money to is called a loan servicer. And most of that servicing has gone to 16 different entities. The major banks on Wall Street are the primary players. They don't own our loans. They probably never owned our loans. And they lose nothing when they foreclose. They just make a killing off the pattern that we've just talked about.
Okay, so they're not the real owner.
Nope. In fact,
but they're the ones who are coming after people.
And they're the ones that the government has put in place to do the modifications. And here's my question. How can someone who doesn't own your loan modify your loan? They can't. When we read these pooling and servicing agreements, the agreements for where the money came from, it often states they can't modify. And yet they're playing this cat and mouse game with us to make us believe we're going to get a modification, when often they have no authority. And I'm hoping that this new teeth in the Fair Debt Collection Practices Act, or Unfair Debt Collection Practices Act, will be able to start hammering them with those issues.
Well, what are some other things that people can do?
Well, get educated. Call us up. Go on our website if you want to get information on this, goodgriefamerica.org. Find out how you can have a voice in getting a moratorium, how you can have a voice in stopping these illegal recordings of these fraudulent documents for foreclosures. We're going to be doing a statewide campaign to educate our county clerks on it. Our counties have lost, Jackson County has lost about $1 million a year because of this in recording fees they should have had.
What about Lane County? Do you know the numbers?
Lane County,
on Lane?
I don't have the exact numbers, but there's probably about $1.5 million a year. And I know that we have that back in our research.
Okay.
And it's ongoing. What if the counties had those additional revenues?
And that's not a huge number in the context of the county's
But if you ask the county clerk in Lane County if she
budget,
could take an extra $1.5 million a year and go back and get $1.5 million over the last 10 years, she'd probably take it. She or he would probably take it.
Yeah.
The other thing is to sue the predators, and we're doing that. We have a strong network of attorneys that are taking these on, and it's becoming more and more affordable. We have solutions, we have ideas, and we ask each and every one of you. And the last book I'm just going to say a couple words about is The Wisdom of the Crowds. When we get to this book, talks about when you put collective minds together, we can start finding solutions to things that seem insurmountable. And that's what we're all about.
That sounds like a very good start anyway.
Yeah. So go to our website or call us at 541-690-8334 or go to goodgriefamerica.org. Have your voice heard, become part of the solution, and thank you for caring.
There's something happening here, but what it is ain't exactly clear.